In a world where a woman's worth was measured by the gold in her father's coffers and the silk in her mother's chest, Maria Elena Santos stood with empty hands but a heart full of dreams. While other girls her age flaunted their dowries like peacocks displaying their feathers, she faced the cruel whispers and mocking laughter of an entire town. They called her La Pobre, the poor one, behind cupped hands and sneering smiles. But what they didn't know was that the most powerful man in 3 counties had been watching her from afar, seeing something that no amount of gold could buy. What he saw in her would shake the very foundations of their small-minded community and prove that some treasures cannot be counted in coins. This is the story of how love conquered prejudice, how character triumphed over cash, and how one woman's courage changed the rules of an entire society. Because sometimes, the heart holds riches that no dowry chest could ever contain. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of San Miguel as Maria Elena Santos swept the front steps of her family's small cottage. Her worn dress, mended countless times with careful stitches, fluttered in the gentle breeze. At 22, she possessed a natural beauty that needed no adornment, dark eyes that sparkled with intelligence, thick black hair that caught the sunlight, and a smile that could warm the coldest heart. Yet in the eyes of San Miguel's society, she might as well have been invisible. "There goes the girl with no dowry," whispered Doña Carmen from her ornate balcony, loud enough for Maria Elena to hear. The wealthy widow adjusted her silk shawl and shook her head disapprovingly. Such a shame. Pretty enough, but what good is beauty without gold to back it? Maria Elena's hands tightened on the broom handle, but she continued her work with quiet dignity. She had learned long ago that responding to such comments only invited more cruelty. Instead, she focused on the simple pleasure of making their modest home clean and welcoming. Her father, Miguel Santos, had been the town's most respected blacksmith until a terrible accident 3 years ago left his right hand severely damaged. The injury had stolen not only his livelihood, but also any hope of saving money for his daughter's dowry. Maria Elena's mother had died giving birth to her, leaving no family jewels or inheritance to ease their financial burden. "Maria Elena," called her father from inside their small cottage. His voice, once strong and commanding, now carried the weight of a man who felt he had failed his only child. She found him sitting at their rough wooden table, staring at a crumpled piece of paper in his good hand. "What is it, Papa?" she asked, settling beside him and placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Miguel's weathered face was etched with worry lines that seemed deeper each day. "The Morales family came by while you were at the market yesterday," he said slowly. "They have officially withdrawn their son Roberto's proposal." Maria Elena felt her heart sink, though she tried not to show it. Roberto Morales was the 3rd young man whose family had initially shown interest in her, only to back away once they learnt of her lack of dowry. The pattern was becoming all too familiar. "They said," Miguel's voice broke slightly, "they said Roberto is a good boy who deserves a wife who can bring prosperity to the family name." "Papa, please don't blame yourself," Maria Elena said softly, though her own heart ached with disappointment. Roberto had seemed different from the others. He had actually spoken to her directly, asking about her thoughts on books and sharing stories about his dreams of expanding his father's shipping business. For a brief moment, she had allowed herself to hope that someone might value her for who she was rather than what she could bring to a marriage. "It's not right," Miguel said, his fist clenching on the table. "A woman should not be reduced to the weight of her father's purse. Your mother was the daughter of a poor fisherman, but she had the biggest heart in all of Mexico. That's what made me fall in love with her, not any dowry." Maria Elena smiled sadly at the familiar story. Her parents' love had been legendary in San Miguel, a romance that had blossomed despite social expectations, but those had been different times, when Miguel Santos was a prosperous blacksmith whose skill was valued above social conventions. The sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones drew their attention to the window. Through the simple cotton curtains, they could see an elaborate procession making its way down their street. At the front rode a magnificent black horse carrying a man in fine clothes, followed by several carriages and attendants. "Don Diego Alejandro Montemayor," Miguel breathed, his voice filled with a mixture of respect and awe. Maria Elena had heard whispers about the legendary rancher all her life, but she had never seen him in person. Don Diego owned the largest ranch in 3 counties, stretching across thousands of acres of the most fertile land in the region. His cattle herds were said to number in the tens of thousands, and his horses were renowned throughout Mexico for their speed and beauty. More importantly, Don Diego was known as a fair and honorable man. Unlike many wealthy landowners who exploited their workers, he paid good wages and treated his employees with respect. Stories were told of how he had personally helped families during difficult times, providing food during droughts and medical care when needed. As the procession passed their cottage, Maria Elena caught a glimpse of the man himself. Even from a distance, she could see that he carried himself with natural authority. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and his face bore the weathered look of a man who spent his days outdoors. There was something in his bearing that spoke of both strength and kindness. "I wonder what brings Don Diego to our humble neighborhood," Miguel mused. Their question was answered the following Sunday at church. Maria Elena sat with her father in their usual pew toward the back, wearing her one good dress that had belonged to her mother. The fabric was faded but clean, and she had spent extra time braiding her hair with a ribbon that had seen better days. The church was buzzing with excited whispers. Don Diego Montemayor sat in the front pew reserved for the town's most prominent families, but unlike the other wealthy parishioners who often seemed more interested in displaying their finery than listening to the sermon, he appeared genuinely focused on Father Martinez's words. After the service, as was customary, the congregation gathered in the church courtyard for socializing. Maria Elena usually helped her father navigate the crowd with his injured hand, then quickly made their way home to avoid the uncomfortable stares and whispered comments about her unmarried status. But today was different. As they made their way toward the church gate, a commotion near the fountain caught their attention. Isabella Herrera, the mayor's daughter and San Miguel's unofficial queen bee, was surrounded by her usual circle of admirers. Her elaborate pink dress, imported from Paris, rustled with each dramatic gesture as she regaled the group with stories of her recent dowry preparations.
"Mama has ordered 12 sets of the finest china from Spain," Isabella announced proudly.
"And Papa has promised a chest of silver that would take 2 men to carry. Any man who marries me will never want for anything," her friend Carmen giggled. "With a dowry like that, you could marry a prince." "Indeed," Isabella replied, with a satisfied smile. "Unlike some unfortunate girls in this town who will never find husbands because their fathers cannot provide even the basics expected of a bride." Though she didn't mention Maria Elena by name, the pointed look in her direction made it clear who she meant. Several people turned to stare, and Maria Elena felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Papa, let's go home," she whispered, tugging gently on her father's arm. But Miguel Santos had endured enough humiliation for his daughter. Despite his physical limitations, his pride as a father remained fierce. He stepped forward, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "A woman's worth cannot be measured in gold or silver," he declared firmly. "My daughter has something far more valuable than any material dowry. She has been blessed with intelligence, kindness, and a heart that cares for others. Any man who cannot see that is not worthy of her." The courtyard fell silent. Isabella's face flushed with anger at being challenged, while others looked uncomfortable at Miguel's bold statement. In their society, openly defying the dowry system was almost unthinkable. "How noble," Isabella replied with false sweetness, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But I'm afraid noble sentiments don't pay bills or maintain a household. A man needs a wife who can contribute to the family's prosperity, not just pretty words." "The girl speaks wisdom," agreed Senor Herrera, Isabella's father and the town's mayor. "Traditions exist for good reasons. A proper dowry ensures that both families can prosper from the union." Other voices joined in agreement, and Maria Elena felt the weight of their collective judgment crushing down upon her. She wished desperately that the ground would open and swallow her whole. Then, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the chatter. "I disagree." Every head turned in surprise. Don Diego Montemayor had been standing quietly near the church entrance, apparently listening to the entire exchange. Now he stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention and respect. "Senor Santos speaks the truth," Don Diego continued, his steady gaze moving across the gathered crowd. "I have built my fortune not through inheritance or dowries, but through honest work and surrounding myself with people of good character. In my experience, a person's integrity and compassion are worth far more than any material possession." The courtyard was so quiet that Maria Elena could hear her own heartbeat. No one dared argue with Don Diego Montemayor, but his words had clearly shocked them. Don Diego's eyes found Maria Elena's across the crowd. For a moment, that felt like eternity. Their gazes met. She saw no pity in his expression, only a kind of quiet understanding that made her feel truly seen for the first time in years. "Senor Santos," Don Diego said, turning to address her father directly, I would be honored if you and your daughter would join me for dinner at my ranch next Sunday evening. I believe we might have much to discuss. Don Diego Montemayor, the most eligible bachelor and wealthiest man in the region, was publicly inviting the town's poorest family to his home. It was unprecedented. Miguel stammered his acceptance, overwhelmed by the unexpected honor. Maria Elena could only nod, still reeling from the encounter. As Don Diego mounted his horse and rode away with his attendants, the courtyard erupted in frantic whispers and speculation. Isabella Herrera looked as though she might faint from shock and rage. Walking home in stunned silence, Maria Elena replayed every moment of the encounter. Don Diego had defended her father's words and challenged the entire social order of San Miguel. But what did his invitation mean? Was it merely an act of kindness toward a struggling family, or something more? "Papa," she finally said as they reached their cottage door, "why do you think Don Diego invited us?" Miguel shook his head in wonder. "I don't know, mija. But I do know that man has a reputation for seeing value where others see only surface appearances. Perhaps he recognizes in you what I have always known, that true worth comes from within." That evening, as Maria Elena helped prepare their simple dinner of beans and tortillas, her mind wandered to the upcoming visit to the Montemayor ranch. She had never been inside a wealthy home before, and the prospect both excited and terrified her. More puzzling was the way Don Diego had looked at her. There had been something in his expression that she couldn't quite identify. A warmth that made her feel as though he had seen past her worn dress and empty dowry chest to something deeper. As she lay in bed that night, listening to her father's gentle snoring from the next room, Maria Elena allowed herself to dream. For the first time in years, she dared to imagine a future where her worth wouldn't be determined by her family's financial circumstances. Outside her small window, the stars sparkled like diamonds against the dark sky. Somewhere beneath those same stars, Don Diego Montemayor was perhaps thinking about their upcoming dinner as well. The thought sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Tomorrow would bring new whispers and speculation from the townspeople. Isabella Herrera would undoubtedly spend the week spreading poison about Maria Elena's unexpected good fortune. But tonight, surrounded by the familiar sounds of her humble home, Maria Elena allowed hope to bloom in her heart like a flower breaking through concrete. She had no way of knowing that her life was about to change forever, or that Don Diego's invitation would set in motion events that would challenge everything San Miguel believed about love, marriage, and the true meaning of wealth. The girl with empty hands was about to discover that sometimes the greatest treasures cannot be held in a dowry chest, but only in the boundless capacity of the human heart. The week following Don Diego's invitation passed like a fever dream for Maria Elena. Every morning brought fresh waves of gossip that seemed to grow more outlandish with each telling. By Tuesday, the story had evolved from a simple dinner invitation to rumors of an impending engagement announcement. By Thursday, some claimed that Don Diego had already sent wedding gifts to the Santos cottage. Maria Elena tried to ignore the constant chatter, but it was impossible to escape entirely. The market vendors who had always treated her with polite indifference now watched her every move with intense curiosity. Children followed her down the street, whispering and giggling. Even Father Martinez pulled her aside after weekday mass to offer counsel about remaining humble in the face of unexpected blessings. The most difficult part was dealing with the sudden change in how people treated her. Women who had never bothered to learn her name now smiled sweetly and complimented her appearance. Men who had dismissed her as unmarriageable suddenly tipped their hats respectfully when she passed. The false kindness felt worse than the previous indifference. Isabella Herrera, however, made no pretense of friendliness. On Wednesday afternoon, she cornered Maria Elena outside the bakery, flanked by her usual group of followers. "I hope you're not getting ideas above your station," Isabella said, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes cold as winter. "Don Diego is simply being charitable. Everyone knows he feels sorry for broken families." Maria Elena kept her expression calm, though her heart raced. "I'm grateful for his kindness," she replied simply. "Kindness, yes," Isabella continued, stepping closer, "but don't mistake charity for romantic interest. Men like Don Diego marry women who can enhance their social position, not diminish it. A dinner invitation doesn't change what you are. A poor girl with nothing to offer." Carmen nodded eagerly. "Isabella's right. My cousin works at the Montemayor Ranch, and she says Don Diego has been receiving marriage proposals from wealthy families across the country. The governor's daughter from Mexico City has been writing him letters for months." "Such beautiful letters, too," added another girl. "Perfumed paper with gold edges. My aunt works for the postal service, and she says they arrive every week." Maria Elena felt a stab of disappointment, though she tried not to show it. Of course, Don Diego would have more suitable options. What had she been thinking? I never assumed anything beyond a kind dinner invitation, she said quietly, stepping back from the group. Isabella's smile turned predatory. Good, because hope can be such a dangerous thing for girls in your position. It would be terrible if you embarrassed yourself by misunderstanding his intentions. That evening, Maria Elena found herself questioning everything. As she sat by the small window in her bedroom, mending yet another tear in her father's work shirt, she wondered if she had been foolish to read anything special into Don Diego's invitation. Perhaps it truly was just an act of charity, motivated by pity rather than genuine interest. Her father seemed to sense her troubled thoughts. He appeared in her doorway, moving carefully with his injured hand. "You're worrying," he observed, settling into the chair beside her. "Papa, what if I'm making too much of this dinner? What if people are right, and it's just kindness?" Miguel was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter's careful stitching. "Do you know why I fell in love with your mother?" he asked finally. Maria Elena smiled slightly. She had heard this story countless times, but it always comforted her. "Because she was beautiful," she said. "No," Miguel shook his head. "Many girls in the village were beautiful. I loved her because of what happened the day we met." This was a detail Maria Elena had never heard before. "What happened?" "There was an old man, a beggar who used to sit outside the church. Most people ignored him or crossed the street to avoid him. But your mother, who was only 15 at the time, stopped to talk with him every day. She shared her lunch with him, asked about his health, treated him like he mattered." Miguel's eyes grew distant with the memory. "One day, I followed her to see why she spent so much time with this strange old man. I watched her bandage a cut on his hand with strips torn from her own petticoat. She was so gentle, so caring. That's when I knew she had the most beautiful heart I'd ever encountered." "But what does this have to do with Don Diego's invitation?" "Think about what happened at the church, Mija. Don Diego could have ignored the whole situation. He's wealthy enough that he doesn't need to concern himself with the problems of poor families. But instead, he chose to speak up for what he believed was right. That tells me something important about his character."
Maria Elena considered this as she continued her mending.
You think he really meant what he said about character being more valuable than dowries? I think Don Diego Montemayor is the kind of man who doesn't say things he doesn't mean.
"And I think," Miguel smiled at his daughter, "that dinner invitation came from a man who saw something special in you, just like I saw something special in your mother." Saturday arrived with unusual weather, a spring rainstorm that turned the dusty streets into rivers of mud. Maria Elena worried that the rain might prevent their visit to the ranch. But by Sunday afternoon, the sun had emerged, leaving the air clean and sweet-smelling. She spent hours preparing for the dinner, though her options were limited. Her wardrobe consisted of 3 dresses: her everyday work dress, her church dress, and her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved but far too formal for a dinner invitation. She settled on her church dress, taking extra time to press out every wrinkle with their old iron heated over the fire. Her father had borrowed a proper shirt from their neighbor, and though it was slightly too large for his diminished frame, he looked dignified and presentable. Together, they made their way to the edge of town where Don Diego had arranged for a carriage to collect them. The carriage ride to the Montemayor ranch took nearly an hour, winding through countryside that Maria Elena had never seen before. Rolling hills stretched in every direction, dotted with cattle and horses. The late afternoon sun painted everything in golden light, making the landscape look almost magical. "Look, Papa," she whispered, pointing to a group of horses running freely across a distant meadow. Their grace and power took her breath away. "Don Diego breeds the finest horses in Mexico," Miguel told her. "They say his stallions are descended from the horses brought by the Spanish conquistadors centuries ago." As they rounded a final curve, the main house came into view, and Maria Elena gasped. She had expected wealth, but nothing had prepared her for the magnificent hacienda that sprawled before them. The building was constructed of warm adobe, with red tile roofs and graceful archways. Bougainvillea cascaded from balconies in brilliant splashes of purple and pink. Fountains sparkled in carefully tended gardens, and the sound of water mixing with birdsong created a peaceful symphony. The carriage pulled up to the main entrance, where Don Diego himself waited to greet them. He wore simple but elegant clothes, a white shirt open at the collar, dark trousers, and polished boots. His informal attire somehow made him seem more approachable than he had appeared in his formal clothes at church. "Señor Santos, Señorita Santos," he said warmly, helping them down from the carriage. "Welcome to Rancho Esperanza, Ranch of Hope." Maria Elena translated silently, thinking the name suited the peaceful beauty of the place. Don Diego led them through courtyards filled with flowering trees and into the main house. The interior was spacious but not ostentatious. Beautiful hand-carved furniture filled rooms with high ceilings and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. Indigenous artwork decorated the walls, and Maria Elena noticed that the household staff moved about their duties with the relaxed confidence of people who felt valued and respected. "Your home is beautiful," Miguel said sincerely. "Thank you," Don Diego replied. "I believe a home should be comfortable rather than showy. Please, let me show you around before dinner." The tour revealed a man of varied interests. They saw a library filled with books on subjects ranging from agriculture to philosophy, a music room with a well-used piano, and workshops where Don Diego apparently worked on various projects himself. Throughout the house, Maria Elena noticed subtle touches that spoke of a life lived with purpose rather than mere accumulation of wealth. "Do you play?" Don Diego asked, noticing her lingering gaze at the piano.
A little, Maria Elena admitted.
"Father Martinez taught me some hymns when I was younger, but we don't have an instrument at home. Perhaps you would honor us with something after dinner?" The dinner itself was a revelation. Rather than the formal, stiff affair Maria Elena had expected, it was warm and conversational. Don Diego asked thoughtful questions about their lives, their interests, their dreams. He listened attentively to Miguel's stories about his blacksmithing days and showed genuine interest in Maria Elena's love of reading. "What is your favorite book?" he asked as they shared a dessert of fresh fruit and honey. "Don Quixote," she answered without hesitation, then blushed slightly. "I know it's not a very feminine choice, but I love the idea of fighting for what you believe in, even when the world thinks you're foolish." Don Diego's eyes lit up with interest. What an intriguing perspective. Most people focus on the comedy of Quixote's delusions, but you see the nobility in his idealism. Sometimes, Maria Elena said thoughtfully, what the world calls madness is really just seeing things as they could be rather than as they are. "Beautifully said," Don Diego replied, and Maria Elena felt a warm flush of pride at his genuine appreciation. As the evening progressed, she found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. Don Diego had the rare gift of making people feel truly heard and valued. He spoke to her father with respect despite their difference in social status, and he addressed Maria Elena as an equal, seeking her opinions and responding to her thoughts with serious consideration. When he asked about her life in San Miguel, Maria Elena found herself sharing more than she had intended. She told him about helping her father after his accident, about the small vegetable garden she maintained behind their cottage, about the reading lessons she gave to some of the younger children whose families couldn't afford proper education.
You teach children to read? Don Diego asked with obvious interest.
"Just a few," Maria Elena said modestly. "Their parents work such long hours that they can't afford to send them to school, and I thought, well, everyone deserves a chance to learn." "How do you manage supplies? Books? Writing materials?" Maria Elena felt embarrassed. "I use charcoal on slate boards mostly, and we share my old childhood primer. It's not much, but the children are so eager to learn." Don Diego was quiet for a moment, and Maria Elena worried she had revealed too much about their poverty. But when he spoke, his voice was filled with admiration. "What you're doing is remarkable," he said sincerely. "Education is one of the greatest gifts we can give, especially to those who have the least opportunity to access it." After dinner, Maria Elena did play the piano, choosing a simple hymn that she knew well. Her voice, clear and sweet, filled the music room as she sang. When she finished, she found both men watching her with something approaching awe. "That was beautiful," Don Diego said softly. "You have a lovely voice." As the evening drew to a close, and they prepared to return home, Don Diego walked them to the waiting carriage. Under the starlit sky, with the sounds of the ranch settling into peaceful night around them, he turned to address them both. "I want to thank you for a wonderful evening," he said. "Your company has been more enjoyable than I can express." "Thank you for your kindness," Miguel replied. "This has been a great honor." Don Diego hesitated for a moment, as though choosing his words carefully. "I hope this won't be our last meeting. Perhaps, if it wouldn't be presumptuous, I might call on you again?" Maria Elena's heart skipped, but she maintained her composure. "We would be honored by your friendship," she said carefully. As they rode home through the darkness, both father and daughter were quiet, lost in their own thoughts. The evening had been magical, but it left more questions than answers. Don Diego had been kind, attentive, and genuinely interested in their lives. But was this the beginning of something deeper, or simply the gracious hospitality of a generous man? "What do you think, Papa?" Maria Elena finally asked, as their cottage came into view. Miguel smiled in the darkness. "I think, mija, that Don Diego Montemayor is a man who sees with his heart rather than his eyes. And I think our lives are about to become much more interesting." As they climbed down from the carriage and made their way to their humble front door, neither could have imagined that by the following Sunday, their quiet existence would be completely transformed. For in the mind of Don Diego Montemayor, a plan was already forming, one that would challenge every social convention in San Miguel and prove that true love recognizes no barriers of wealth or station. The dinner invitation had been just the beginning. The Monday following their dinner at Rancho Esperanza dawned grey and drizzling, matching the unsettled feeling in Maria Elena's heart. As she went about her morning routine of sweeping and tidying their small cottage, her mind kept drifting back to the previous evening. Every detail remained vivid. The warmth in Don Diego's eyes when she spoke about teaching the children, the way he had listened so intently to her thoughts about books, the gentle respect he had shown her father. But in the harsh light of day, surrounded by the familiar poverty of their circumstances, the entire evening felt almost dreamlike. Had she imagined the connection she thought she felt? Was she reading too much into simple kindness? Her questions were interrupted by a knock at their door. Maria Elena opened it to find a young man in riding clothes, clearly one of Don Diego's ranch hands, holding a package wrapped in fine paper. "Señorita Santos?" he asked politely. "Don Diego Montemayor asked me to deliver this to you." With trembling hands, Maria Elena accepted the package. Inside, she found a collection of children's books, real primers with colorful illustrations, slate boards, chalk, and even small notebooks with pencils. A note was tucked among the supplies, written in Don Diego's bold handwriting. "For your students, who deserve every opportunity to learn and grow. Thank you for sharing your beautiful voice with us last evening. Diego." Maria Elena sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. The books alone were worth more than her family's monthly income, yet Don Diego had given them freely to support her small teaching efforts. "What is it, mija?" Miguel asked, appearing from his workshop where he had been attempting to repair a neighbor's broken knife, one of the few tasks his injured hand could still manage. She showed him the gift and the note. Miguel's eyes widened as he examined the quality of the materials. "This is no casual gesture," he said thoughtfully. "These books were carefully chosen. Look, this one teaches reading through traditional Mexican folktales, and this one focuses on practical mathematics. Don Diego has thought deeply about what your students would need. But why would he do this? We barely know each other." Miguel set down one of the books and looked at his daughter seriously. "Because, Maria Elena, when a good man recognizes goodness in others, he wants to support it. Don Diego saw how much you care about those children, and he wants to help you succeed." That afternoon brought another surprise. Isabella Herrera arrived at their cottage, this time alone, her usual entourage nowhere in sight. She wore one of her finest dresses and a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maria Elena," she said sweetly, "I hope you don't mind my calling. I wanted to apologize for my harsh words the other day. I was upset about, well, other things, and I took it out on you unfairly." Maria Elena was suspicious but tried to respond graciously. "Thank you for saying so, Isabella. Would you like some tea? That's very kind." Isabella seated herself carefully on their humble wooden chair, looking around the cottage with barely concealed disdain. "I've been thinking about your situation and I want to help." "Help?" "Well, yes. You see, Don Diego's invitation has caused quite a stir, as you might imagine. People are talking, making assumptions. I thought you should know that several of the town's most prominent families are concerned." Maria Elena felt her stomach tighten. Concerned about what? Isabella's smile became more genuine, but not in a pleasant way. About the impropriety of it all. A wealthy, unmarried man entertaining a poor girl without a chaperone? It's really quite scandalous when you think about it. My father was present the entire evening. "Oh, of course," Isabella waved dismissively. "But you know how people talk. They're saying that Don Diego might be taking advantage of your family's desperation, that perhaps he has less than honorable intentions." The words hit Maria Elena like physical blows. She had been so focused on the beauty of the evening that she hadn't considered how it might appear to others. "I'm sure that's not," she began. but Isabella cut her off. Of course not. I know you would never behave improperly, but appearances matter so much, don't they? Which is why I wanted to offer you some advice as a friend. Maria Elena doubted Isabella's friendship, but nodded for her to continue. The wise thing would be to decline any further invitations. Let people see that you understand your place and aren't trying to climb above your station. It would save you from much gossip and potential heartbreak. And why do you care about my heartbreak? Maria Elena asked quietly. Isabella's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the jealousy beneath. Because I hate to see good people hurt themselves with impossible dreams. Don Diego will eventually marry someone suitable, someone with the proper background and dowry to match his position. The longer you allow yourself to hope for something different, the more painful it will be when reality sets in. After Isabella left, Maria Elena sat alone in the cottage, her mind churning. The cruel words echoed earlier doubts, making her question everything about the previous evening. Had she misread Don Diego's kindness? Was she setting herself up for humiliation and heartbreak? When her father returned from his afternoon errands, he immediately sensed her troubled mood. Isabella Herrera was here, Maria Elena explained, repeating the conversation. Miguel's face darkened with anger. That girl has poison where her heart should be. She's jealous and trying to manipulate you. But Papa, what if she's right about some things? What if people really are talking?
What if I'm embarrassing myself by believing that someone like Don Diego could be genuinely interested in someone like me?
Miguel sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. Maria Elena, I need to tell you something.
Something I should have told you long ago. She looked at him in surprise. Your mother and I faced the same doubts when we were courting. People said I was reaching too high, that a blacksmith's apprentice had no business pursuing the daughter of even a poor fisherman. They said she was too beautiful for me, too refined, that she deserved better. But you married anyway. We almost didn't. The talk got so bad that your mother began avoiding me. She was protecting both of us from gossip, she said. For 3 months we barely spoke. What changed? Miguel smiled at the memory. One day she fell ill with fever. Her father sent for me because he knew I cared about her. For a week, I sat by her bedside, helping her family care for her. When she recovered, she told me that she realized she had been letting other people's fears control her life.
And she said that she would rather face the world's disapproval with me than live safely without me.
We were married 6 months later, and despite everything people predicted, we had 15 beautiful years together before God called her home. Maria Elena felt tears stinging her eyes. I miss her so much, Papa. I know, mija. But she lives on in you. And I know she would want you to be brave enough to accept happiness when it's offered, regardless of what small-minded people might say. Their conversation was interrupted by another knock at the door. This time, it was Father Martinez, looking unusually serious. Forgive the intrusion, he said, but I felt I should speak with you both. They invited him in, and he settled heavily into their remaining chair. There has been talk, he began carefully, about yesterday evening. Some parishioners are concerned about the propriety of the situation.
Maria Elena felt her face burn with embarrassment.
However, Father Martinez continued, raising his hand to stop her from speaking, I wanted you to know that I have also spoken with Don Diego Montemayor. Both Maria Elena and Miguel looked at him in surprise.
He came to see me this morning, the priest explained.
He wanted to ensure that his intentions were understood and above reproach. He has asked for my guidance in properly courting you, Maria Elena. Courting, she whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Father Martinez nodded gravely. Don Diego has made his intentions clear. He wishes to pursue an honorable courtship, with all proper protocols observed. He has asked if I would serve as a spiritual advisor during this time and ensure that everything is conducted with the utmost propriety.
Miguel cleared his throat.
And what did you tell him, Father? I told him that Maria Elena is one of the finest young women in our community, that any man would be blessed to have her as a wife, regardless of financial considerations, and that if his intentions are truly honorable, he has my blessing to proceed. Maria Elena felt the world spinning around her. He really said courting? He did indeed. In fact, he has asked permission to call on you again this Sunday, with your father's permission and with me present as chaperone if you prefer. That evening, as word of Don Diego's formal courtship intentions spread through San Miguel, the Santos cottage became the center of a storm of activity. Some neighbors stopped by to offer congratulations, others came out of curiosity, and a few arrived to express their disapproval. Through it all, Maria Elena felt as though she was floating in a dream. The man she had admired from afar, the wealthy rancher who could have chosen any woman in Mexico, had formally declared his intention to court her, the girl with no dowry, no social standing, nothing to offer but herself. Late that night, as she lay in bed listening to the sounds of the village settling into sleep, Maria Elena allowed herself to truly believe for the first time that perhaps, just perhaps, fairy tales could come true even for poor girls in small Mexican towns. But she had no way of knowing that across town in the grand house of the mayor, Isabella Herrera was sitting at her desk, writing urgent letters to Mexico City. Letters that would soon bring powerful opposition to Don Diego's unconventional courtship. Letters that would test whether their growing love was strong enough to withstand the full weight of society's disapproval. The next few days brought a whirlwind of preparations and emotions. Don Diego sent word through Father Martinez that he would like to take Maria Elena on a proper chaperoned outing, a picnic lunch followed by a tour of the ranch's educational programs for workers' children. As Maria Elena prepared for this second meeting, she found herself torn between excitement and terror. The stakes felt so much higher now that his intentions were publicly known. Everyone in San Miguel would be watching, judging, waiting to see if this impossible romance could survive the harsh light of reality. Her father helped her choose her outfit, her mother's best shawl paired with her church dress, carefully mended and pressed. As she looked at herself in their small mirror, Maria Elena saw not a poor girl reaching above her station, but a young woman ready to discover what her heart might be capable of. "Remember," Miguel said as he walked her to where Don Diego waited with a carriage and Father Martinez, "you deserve happiness, just as much as any woman ever born. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As Maria Elena stepped into the carriage beside Don Diego, their eyes met and held. In that moment, she saw not calculation nor pity, but something that took her breath away, the look of a man who had found exactly what he had been searching for without even knowing he was looking.
"Good afternoon, Maria Elena," he said softly.
"You look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. As the carriage pulled away from the Santos cottage, carrying them toward an uncertain but promising future, Maria Elena realized that her real story was just beginning. The girl who had swept her front steps that first morning, resigned to a life of quiet desperation, no longer existed. In her place sat a woman ready to fight for love, dignity, and the radical idea that a person's worth had nothing to do with the size of their bank account. 3 weeks into their courtship, Maria Elena had begun to believe that perhaps love really could conquer all obstacles. Don Diego had proven himself to be everything she had dared to hope: kind, intelligent, genuinely interested in her thoughts and dreams, and completely unimpressed by social conventions that tried to dictate whom he should love. Their outings had become the highlight of her weeks. Always properly chaperoned by Father Martinez, or accompanied by her father, they had explored the countryside around San Miguel, shared picnic lunches under ancient oak trees, and spent long hours discussing everything from books to philosophy to dreams for the future. Don Diego had even begun including her in some of his charitable projects, valuing her insights about the needs of the town's poorer families. But on this particular Tuesday morning, as Maria Elena helped her father with his breakfast, their peaceful world was about to be shattered. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an elegant carriage bearing Mexico City license plates that pulled up outside their cottage. From it emerged a woman of obvious wealth and authority, tall, impeccably dressed, with steel-grey hair arranged in an elaborate style. She was accompanied by a younger woman who bore a striking resemblance to her, both in features and in the cold hauteur that seemed to surround them like an expensive perfume. "Are you Maria Elena Santos?" the older woman asked, her voice crisp with authority and disdain. "Yes, señora," Maria Elena replied cautiously. "I am Doña Esperanza Montemayor de Villarreal, Don Diego's aunt. This is my daughter, Catalina. We need to speak with you immediately." Maria Elena's heart sank as she recognized the names. Don Diego had mentioned his aunt occasionally, a widow who had married into one of Mexico's most prestigious families, and who took family honor very seriously. He had never spoken of her warmly. "Please come in," Maria Elena said politely, though every instinct warned her that this visit would bring nothing but trouble. The two women entered the modest cottage, their designer clothes and jewels creating a sharp contrast with the simple furnishings. Doña Esperanza's eyes swept the room with obvious distaste, taking in the carefully mended furniture, the humble decorations, the clear signs of a family struggling to maintain dignity despite financial hardship. Sit down, child, Doña Esperanza commanded, settling herself in their best chair as though granting an audience to a servant. We have serious matters to discuss. Catalina remained standing, her beautiful face arranged in an expression of bored superiority. She was perhaps 25, with the kind of refined beauty that came from generations of careful breeding and unlimited access to the finest clothes and cosmetics. I suppose you know why we're here, Doña Esperanza began without preamble. I'm not certain, Senora. Don't play innocent with me, girl. Word of this ridiculous courtship has reached Mexico City, and I can assure you that Diego's entire family is appalled. Do you have any idea what you're doing to our family's reputation? Maria Elena felt anger rising in her chest, but forced herself to remain calm. Don Diego has been nothing but honorable in his intentions toward me. Honorable? Doña Esperanza laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. There is nothing honorable about a man of Diego's position making a spectacle of himself with a dome. Shh. Person of your circumstances. Mother, perhaps we should be more diplomatic, Catalina suggested, though her tone suggested she was merely bored by the entire situation.
Diplomatic? There's no time for diplomacy when the family name is being dragged through the mud. Doña Esperanza leaned forward, fixing Maria Elena with a steely stare. Let me be perfectly clear, Miss Santos. This fantasy you're entertaining ends now.
I beg your pardon? Diego is going through what we might charitably call a temporary lapse in judgment.
Perhaps he's been isolated too long on that ranch of his, away from proper society. But this infatuation will pass, and when it does, he'll remember his obligations to his family and his social position. Maria Elena stood up slowly, her dignity intact despite the verbal assault. Don Diego is a grown man capable of making his own decisions about his life.
Easy. Doña Esperanza smiled coldly.
Let me tell you something about the Montemayor family fortune, child. Diego may own that ranch, but the bulk of his wealth comes from family investments managed by the bank I control. His comfortable lifestyle, his charitable projects, his ability to maintain that grand hacienda, it all depends on continued family support. The threat was clear, and Maria Elena felt cold fear creeping up her spine. Catalina stepped forward, her voice soft but cutting. What my mother is trying to explain is that Diego would lose everything if he were to make an unsuitable marriage.
The family trust has very specific provisions about maintaining appropriate social standards. You're saying you would cut him off financially if he married me?
I'm saying that choices have consequences, Doña Esperanza replied.
Diego has always been idealistic, but when faced with the reality of poverty, with watching his workers lose their jobs and his charitable projects collapse, do you really think he would choose you over everything he's built? Maria Elena felt the room spinning around her.
The cruelty of the situation was breathtaking. They were asking her to give up love to protect the man she loved from the consequences of loving her. Furthermore, Doña Esperanza continued.
There are other considerations.
The governor's daughter, Esperanza Delgado, has been expecting a proposal from Diego for months. Her father has been very patient, but that patience has limits.
Political alliances in Mexico are delicate things, Miss Santos. Diego's rejection of Esperanza has already caused complications.
What kind of complications? Catalina answered this time. The Delgado family controls several government contracts that benefit the region. Transportation contracts, water rights, trade licenses. If Diego continues to insult them by pursuing this impossible courtship, those contracts might be awarded to other regions.
You're threatening the entire community? Maria Elena asked, horrified. We're explaining reality, Doña Esperanza said matter-of-factly.
Hundreds of jobs depend on those contracts. The economic survival of San Miguel itself hangs in the balance.
Are you prepared to take responsibility for that kind of devastation? Maria Elena sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the weight of what she was hearing. These women weren't just threatening her happiness. They were threatening to destroy the lives of everyone she cared about.
I can see that you're beginning to understand, Doña Esperanza said with satisfaction. You seem like a sensible girl, despite your unfortunate circumstances. Surely you can see that this infatuation can only lead to disaster for everyone involved. What do you want from me? Maria Elena whispered. It's quite simple. You will tell Diego that you've realized the impossibility of the situation and that you're ending the courtship. You'll explain that you've found someone more suitable to your station. We've arranged for a young man from the next town to begin courting you immediately, a shopkeeper's son.
Quite respectable for someone in your position.
And if I refuse?
The smile that crossed Doña Esperanza's face was truly frightening. Then Diego will lose everything. His wealth, his ranch, his ability to help the people he cares about.
The government contracts will be pulled, throwing half of San Miguel into unemployment. And you, my dear, will be blamed for all of it. People will know it was your doing, not mine. Will they? Who would believe that a poor girl was innocent when she could have stepped aside gracefully, but chose instead to destroy a good man's life for her own selfish desires? The story writes itself, doesn't it? Catalina moved closer, her voice taking on a falsely sympathetic tone. We're not monsters, Maria Elena. We understand that you have feelings for Diego, that sometimes love means making sacrifices. If you truly care about him, you'll protect him from the consequences of this impossible choice. After the women left, Maria Elena sat alone in the cottage, feeling as though her world had collapsed around her. Every word they had spoken rang with the cold logic of absolute power.
They could and would destroy Diego if she didn't comply with their demands.
When her father returned from his morning errands, he found her sitting motionless in her chair, tears streaming down her face.
Me, what's happened? Through broken sobs, she told him everything. Miguel's face grew darker with each revelation, and by the end of her story his hands were clenched into fists, despite his injury. Monsters, he said quietly. They're absolute monsters. Papa, what am I going to do? If what they said is true, then we fight, Miguel said firmly. We don't surrender to bullies and extortionists, but the consequences of giving in to evil are always worse than the consequences of standing up to it. Your mother understood that. It's why she married me, despite the opposition. This is different, Papa. They're not just threatening social disapproval, they're threatening to destroy people's lives. Miguel knelt beside his daughter's chair, taking her hands in his own. Listen to me, Maria Elena. Do you love Diego? Yes, she whispered. And does he love you? I think so. I hope so. Then this decision isn't yours to make alone. You owe it to both of you to tell him what happened and let him choose for himself what he's willing to risk. But what if they're right? What if he chooses his family fortune over me? What if I'm being selfish by even giving him that choice? Miguel was quiet for a long moment. Your mother once told me something that I've never forgotten.
She said that real love isn't about protecting people from difficult choices. It's about trusting them enough to make those choices for themselves.
That evening, Maria Elena sent word to Don Diego asking if they could meet urgently.
They arranged to see each other at the church with Father Martinez present, as had become their custom. Don Diego took one look at her face and knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. What's happened? He asked, his voice filled with concern. With Father Martinez listening in growing alarm, Maria Elena recounted the entire visit from Doña Esperanza and Catalina. As she spoke, she watched Don Diego's expression change from concern to anger to something approaching fury. Those evil women, he said quietly when she finished.
I should have known they would try something like this.
Diego, Maria Elena said carefully, is it true about the family trust in the government contracts? He was silent for a long moment, and her heart sank.
Some of it, he admitted finally. My aunt does control a significant portion of the family investments. And yes, there are political complications with the Delgado family that could affect the region. Then, maybe. No, he said firmly. Maria Elena, look at me. She raised her eyes to meet his, seeing something burning there that took her breath away. I don't care about my aunt's money. I don't care about political contracts or social expectations or anything else except this. I love you. I love your kindness, your intelligence, your courage, your beautiful heart. I want to marry you and spend the rest of my life proving every day that you are worth every sacrifice. But your ranch, your workers, the people who depend on you, we'll find another way. There are always other options for people willing to work hard and think creatively. What there isn't, Maria Elena, is another you, and I won't let anyone take you away from me without a fight. Father Martinez, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke. Don Diego, you should know that the consequences they've threatened are very real. Your aunt has significant influence.
Then we'll have to be stronger than their influence, Diego replied.
Father, you've seen how Maria Elena and I are together.
Do you believe that our love is worth fighting for? The old priest looked at them both for a long moment.
Yes, he said finally. Yes, I do.
But you should both understand that the battle ahead will be fierce. We understand, Diego said, reaching for Maria Elena's hand.
Don't we, amor? Maria Elena felt her heart soar at the endearment, at the certainty in his voice, at the strength of his hand holding hers.
Yes,
she whispered.
we understand. But as they made plans to face the storm together, none of them could have imagined just how far Doña Esperanza was willing to go to destroy their happiness. The battle for their love was about to become a war that would shake the foundations of San Miguel itself. The next morning would bring news that would test their resolve in ways they never could have anticipated. The attack came at dawn on Thursday morning, swift and devastating as a summer storm. Maria Elena was awakened by urgent pounding on their cottage door, followed by her father's alarmed voice calling her name. She rushed from her bedroom to find Miguel speaking with their neighbor, Señor Ramirez, whose face was pale with worry.
"What's wrong?" she asked, fear already clutching at her heart.
"It's Don Diego," Señor Ramirez said breathlessly. "There's been an accident at the ranch, a terrible accident." Maria Elena felt the world tilt around her. What kind of accident? A fire in the stables last night. They say Don Diego was trapped trying to save the horses. He's been badly hurt. Without thinking, Maria Elena grabbed her shawl and started for the door, but Señor Ramirez caught her arm. "Wait, there's more. Doña Esperanza has taken control of the ranch. She's telling everyone that Diego is too injured to make decisions, and that she's acting as his guardian. She's forbidden anyone from the village to visit him." "That's impossible," Miguel said angrily. "Diego is a grown man. She has no legal authority over him."
"She has documents," Señor Ramirez replied grimly.
"Official papers from Mexico City giving her power of attorney during his incapacity, and she has armed guards at the ranch gates." Maria Elena felt sick with fear and rage. The timing was too convenient, too perfect. Doña Esperanza had threatened consequences, and now Diego was conveniently incapacitated and under her control. "I have to see him," she said desperately. "I have to know that he's all right. Señorita, they won't let you past the gates. Doña Esperanza has given strict orders that you specifically are not to be admitted under any circumstances." The next several days passed in a nightmare of worry and helplessness. Reports filtered back from the ranch through workers and suppliers, but the information was contradictory and frightening. Some said Diego was recovering well. Others whispered that his injuries were far more serious than initially reported. Father Martinez attempted to visit in his capacity as a priest, but was turned away at the gates. Even the doctor from San Miguel was prevented from seeing Diego, with Doña Esperanza claiming that specialists from Mexico City were providing all necessary care. Meanwhile, the consequences Doña Esperanza had threatened began to unfold with clockwork precision. Government contracts were suddenly cancelled, throwing dozens of families into financial crisis. The weekly market, which depended on trade licenses controlled by the Delgado family, was restricted to essential goods only. Shops began closing their doors, and rumors spread that the railway spur that connected San Miguel to the main line might lose its operating permit. "They're destroying the whole town to get to me," Maria Elena told her father as they watched another neighbor pack his belongings onto a cart, preparing to seek work elsewhere. "They're showing their true nature," Miguel replied grimly. "This is who they really are, beneath all that refined polish. People who had hurt innocent families to protect their own privilege." On Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after the fire, Maria Elena made a decision that would change everything. She dressed in her finest clothes, braided her hair carefully, and walked through the center of town to the church. Word of her appearance spread quickly, and by the time Mass began, the building was packed with curious onlookers. Father Martinez looked surprised to see her but welcomed her with a warm smile. As the service concluded and people began filing out, Maria Elena stood up in her pew. "Before you leave," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the stone building, "I have something to say." The congregation froze, turning to stare at her in surprise. Isabella Herrera, who sat in the front pew with her family, looked particularly shocked. "Many of you are suffering because of me," Maria Elena continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You're losing your jobs, your security, your hope for the future. And I know that some of you blame me for bringing this trouble to our community." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but she pressed on. "I want you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. I never asked to fall in love with Don Diego, just as he never asked to fall in love with me.
Love doesn't consult social expectations or family fortunes. It simply happens, like sunrise or rainfall or any other force of nature.
So what are you saying? Called out Senor Herrera, Isabella's father and the mayor. Are you going to do the right thing and end this madness?
Maria Elena looked directly at him, her spine straight with dignity. I'm saying that I will not be bullied into abandoning love by people who think money gives them the right to control other people's hearts. I'm saying that if Don Diego and I are meant to be together, we will find a way, regardless of the obstacles placed in our path. The church erupted in surprised chatter, but Maria Elena wasn't finished. However, she continued, raising her voice to regain their attention, I will not be the cause of your continued suffering. If the powerful families want to punish this town for my choices, then I will remove myself from the equation. What do you mean? Father Martinez asked, concern evident in his voice.
I mean that I'm leaving San Miguel, today.
I will go far enough away that my presence can no longer be used as an excuse to hurt the people I care about. Maria Elena. No, her father protested, rising from his seat beside her. It's the only way, Papa. As long as I'm here, they can continue to claim that I'm manipulating Don Diego, that I'm preventing him from making proper choices. If I disappear, they'll have no choice but to release him and restore the contracts. And if Diego recovers and wants to find you? Father Martinez asked quietly. Maria Elena smiled sadly. Then he'll have to decide whether I'm worth searching for.
And if I'm meant to be his wife, if our love is truly strong enough to overcome all obstacles, then love will find a way.
The congregation watched in stunned silence as Maria Elena walked down the center aisle of the church, her head held high.
At the door, she turned back one final time. I want you all to remember something, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the building. Today you've seen what happens when good people allow themselves to be controlled by fear and greed. You've watched innocent families suffer because powerful people didn't approve of who someone chose to love. Ask yourselves whether this is the kind of community you want to live in. That afternoon, Maria Elena and Miguel packed their few belongings and quietly left San Miguel. They traveled by wagon to the next town, where Maria Elena had arranged to stay with a distant cousin while seeking work as a teacher. Her father would return to San Miguel once things settled down, but she was determined to stay away until her presence could no longer be used as a weapon against the people she loved. What she didn't know was that 3 days later, Don Diego Montemayor would wake up from the fever that had kept him unconscious since the fire to discover that the woman he loved had vanished. What followed became the stuff of legend in San Miguel. Diego's injuries, while serious, were not nearly as severe as his aunt had claimed. The fire in the stables had been real, but it was later discovered to have been deliberately set. Diego had been injured trying to save his horses, but his unconsciousness had been prolonged by sedatives administered by the specialists his aunt had brought from Mexico City. When he regained full consciousness and learned what had happened in his absence, the cancelled contracts, the suffering of the townspeople, and most devastatingly, Maria Elena's disappearance, his rage was magnificent to behold. The confrontation between Diego and his aunt took place in the main hall of Rancho Esperanza, with half the household staff as witnesses. You evil, manipulative woman, Diego said, his voice deadly quiet. You deliberately destroyed innocent people's lives to satisfy your own prejudices. Doña Esperanza, for once, looked less than completely confident. I did what was necessary to protect our family's interests. Our family's interests? Or your own twisted desire to control everyone around you?
Diego stepped closer, his eyes blazing with fury.
You drugged me. You lied about my condition. You used my name to terrorize an entire community, and you drove away the woman I love. Diego! Be reasonable! Catalina interjected. The girl left of her own accord. Doesn't that tell you something about her true feelings? It tells me that she loves me enough to sacrifice her own happiness to protect others from your cruelty, Diego replied. Which is more than I can say for my own family. If you marry that penniless nobody, you'll lose everything, Doña Esperanza warned. The trust fund, the investments, your comfortable lifestyle. Diego's smile was cold as winter. Then I'll rebuild from nothing, and I'll do it with the woman I love by my side, proving every day that character matters more than pedigree. You're making a terrible mistake. No, Diego said firmly. My only mistake was ever trusting you enough to let you into my life. Guards! Escort my aunt and cousin from my property immediately. They are no longer welcome here. You can't do this. I have legal authority. Your fraudulent documents have no power over a man who is clearly competent and conscious.
Now get out of my house before I have you arrested for kidnapping and fraud. As the guards escorted a protesting Doña Esperanza from the ranch, Diego was already planning his next moves. First, he would use his own resources to restore the government contracts, calling in every favor and leveraging every relationship he had built over the years. Then, he would find Maria Elena, no matter how far she had traveled or how well she had hidden herself. The search took 3 weeks. Diego sent riders in every direction, following rumors and gossip from village to village. Finally, a merchant who traveled the trade routes brought word of a young woman teaching school in a town 2 days' ride to the north, a woman who matched Maria Elena's description, and who had arrived recently with an older man who spoke of being a blacksmith. Diego rode out immediately, traveling through the night to reach the small town where Maria Elena had taken refuge. He found her in a one-room schoolhouse, teaching a group of children to read using the books he had given her weeks earlier. She was in the middle of a lesson when he appeared in the doorway, and the sight of him took her breath away. He looked thinner, with healing burns on his hands and arms, but his eyes held the same warmth and determination she remembered. "Children," he said politely, "might I speak with your teacher for a moment?" The children giggled and whispered as Maria Elena stepped outside with him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You left," he said simply. "I had to. They were hurting people because of me. They were hurting people because they're cruel and selfish. That was never your fault." Tears began flowing down her cheeks. "I thought you were badly injured. I thought you might die, and it would be because you had chosen to love me." Diego stepped closer, gently wiping away her tears with his bandaged hands. "I nearly did die, but not from the fire. I nearly died from the thought that I had lost you forever. Your family, the contracts, everything they threatened, all taken care of. My aunt no longer has any influence over my life or my choices. The government contracts have been restored. And the people of San Miguel are asking when their guardian angel is coming home." "Guardian angel?" Diego smiled. "That's what they're calling you now. When they realized that you had sacrificed your own happiness to protect them from further suffering, the whole town turned against my aunt and her allies. Even Isabella Herrera publicly apologized for her treatment of you. And you? What about your fortune, your comfortable life? I kept what I needed to take care of my responsibilities. The rest, well, money that comes with conditions attached isn't really yours anyway, is it?" He took her hands gently. "Maria Elena, I have a question to ask you." To her amazement, Don Diego Alejandro Montemayor, the richest and most powerful man in 3 counties, slowly lowered himself to one knee in the dusty yard of a humble village schoolhouse. "Maria Elena Santos," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the small plaza where curious villagers had begun to gather. "You have no dowry to offer, no family connections, no material wealth to bring to a marriage. What you do have is the most generous heart, the strongest character, and the most beautiful spirit I have ever encountered." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring. "I don't want your dowry, because your heart is enough. I don't need your money, because your love makes me richer than any fortune ever could. Will you marry me? Not because it makes social sense or political sense or financial sense, but because we love each other and choose to build a life together based on that love." Through her tears, Maria Elena looked down at this extraordinary man who had turned his back on social conventions, family pressure, and material security for the chance to spend his life with her. Around them, the gathered villagers held their breath, waiting for her answer. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Diego. Yes, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Children ran through the street shouting the news, church bells began ringing, and within minutes the entire town was celebrating the engagement of the wealthy rancher and the poor teacher who had proven that love could indeed conquer all obstacles. 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning, Maria Elena Santos became Maria Elena Montemayor, in the most beautiful wedding San Miguel had ever witnessed. The ceremony was held outdoors at Rancho Esperanza, with the entire community invited to attend. Father Martinez performed the service. Miguel Santos walked his daughter down an aisle decorated with wildflowers, and even Isabella Herrera wept with genuine happiness for the bride. As they exchanged vows under an arch of blooming bougainvillea, Diego spoke words that would be remembered in San Miguel for generations to come. "Today I marry not a dowry or a social position or a business arrangement," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "Today I marry the woman who taught me that the greatest treasures in life cannot be inherited or purchased or locked away in trust funds. Today I marry love itself. And when Father Martinez pronounced them husband and wife, when Diego kissed his bride while their friends and family cheered, when Maria Elena looked out over the celebrating crowd and realized that she had found not just love but a community that now understood the difference between wealth and worth, she knew that her mother had been right. Sometimes the greatest riches really cannot be counted in coins. Sometimes a heart full of love truly is enough. Years later, when their own children asked about the early days of their marriage, when visitors to Rancho Esperanza inquired about the unusual story of how the wealthy rancher had come to marry the poor village girl, Diego and Maria Elena would smile at each other with the contentment of people who had chosen correctly. "Your mother," Diego would tell their children, "taught our entire community that a person's worth has nothing to do with their family's bank account. She showed us that courage, kindness, and love are the only dowries that truly matter." And Maria Elena, now a respected matron who ran schools throughout the region and was beloved by everyone who knew her, would add softly, "And your father taught me that when someone truly loves you, your heart is enough."
It's always enough.
In the end, they had proven that fairy tales could come true, even for poor girls in small Mexican towns. But more importantly, they had shown their community and themselves that the greatest love stories aren't about princes rescuing princesses or wealth conquering poverty. They're about two people who choose to see past society's limitations to find the extraordinary value in each other's hearts.